Welcome to Chapter 1. In this unit, we are going to accomplish these objectives. You do not need to copy anything down or take any notes, but simply pay attention. First off, we are going to need to learn to speak, hear, read, write macrons. That's the little bar over each of these letters, over each of these vowels, in the proper situations. A less important objective, but something you still need to do, is in faded gray. I still put it up there, but it's not so important. You need to know what that situation is when you use macrons. Actually, it's situations, plural. And then our second objective is that we need to distinguish certain forms that look very similar, and in the second case, sound very similar. So, ah and ah and ah and ah. A third, not so important objective is to learn the other noun endings. So, any noun ending you see in this video is, of course, going to be used in this chapter, and you need to know it. There will be no assessment of this material, but you will need it for completing all the writable stories. Alright, so let's begin. First off, you should have uncovered 3 lines on chart number 2. And these are your grammar charts. 1 area on chart number 3, and 1, 2, 3 areas on chart number 5. So, in this video I'm going to only deal with chart number 2 here, and I'm going to blow it up big so it'll look like that. Okay. Here are our new endings for chapter that we will be using in chapter 1. Not many of them, but and you probably should learn these all by heart. So if you have some way to recite them, I, or to think of some word that includes all of them, that would be a good thing. First off, we're going to learn the nominative singular, ablative singular, and nominative plural endings for the first and second declension. The first declension is almost all feminine nouns. So, just like in English, girls' names end in A, the same thing happens in Latin. The second declension can be masculine or neuter. Here we have masculine on the left in white, neuter on the right in gray. So, alright. One thing we need to pay attention to, the main thing in this video, is the little bar over top of some of these letters. That bar is called a macron, and as you learned in the pronunciation video, you do 2 things there. One is that you hold that vowel for a length of 2. I hope you remember that. Rather than a length of 1, so double long. And the other thing is you pronounce it with a hard sound rather than a soft sound. That hard sound versus soft sound will be distinguishable in 4 of the 5 vowels, in E, I, O, and U. But it is not so distinguishable in this first one, A. So this can become a bit of a doozy, and people can easily confuse ah and ah. So, what is the difference? Well, there isn't really much of a difference in the sound itself, in the tone. One is, actually this one down here is said with the mouth opened a little wider, but it still sounds pretty much like an ah sound. So the main difference between these two then is really the length. We hold this one for a count of 1, ah, and we hold this one for a count of 2, ah. And you can even lower, if you're opening your mouth wider, you can even lower the pitch and really make your vocal cords buzz to emphasize ah. You can hear your vocal cords buzzing. The nominative plural ending for feminines is, of course, I. So I. In the masculines, o, e, and in the neuters, o, ah. So, let's go to some examples. So here we have actual words. Roma. In Roma. Actually, let's not get there yet. Let's just do that much. Roma and Romai. So, what situations do we use each of these separate endings? And I. Well, obviously we use the I if we're talking about a plural, if there were multiple Romes. Is by itself, without a macron, is used when the word is the subject of the sentence. That is, when it is the thing we're talking about, when it does the action of the verb. However, if we're not talking about Roma, but it's just a side thought, then we'll probably use it in what's called a prepositional phrase. Now, a phrase is two or more words without a verb. So, like, through the window is a phrase. And there are 8 prepositions in Latin that use an ablative, and they are represented by this mnemonic device, sub in de sine pro ab cum ex, or sid space. In chapter 1, the only one we're going to learn is in. So, in is represented by the I here. So, you will never see Roma unless there is, in this chapter, unless there is an in front of it. Like that. Okay, so if you see in, it had better go with a long A, with a macron de. I better not see on your paper a macron de without in, and I had better not see in without a macron A or O or whatever. Okay, so talking about Rome, we use short A. Mentioning Rome in a side thought, in Roma, although it's not the main idea in the sentence, like dogs in Rome live. Well, the main idea is dogs live, but if it's a side thought, then it's in a prepositional phrase, then we're going to use that long A, and then, of course, I for plurals. The masculines are the same, but easier to distinguish, and the neuters are the same, but easier to distinguish. Egypt, in Egypt. Aegyptus, in Aegypto. And if there are 2 Egypts, northern and southern, Aegypti. Okay. One town, oppidum, in the town, or town as a side thought, oppido, and then towns, oppida. Notice this ending and this one up here are identical. How can you distinguish them? There is no way. The only way you can distinguish them is context, by knowing what the words mean. This one will, up here will be feminine singular. This one will be neuter plural. But you usually can distinguish them pretty easily. After all, we have the same problem in English. We have any girl's name, like Carla, and then we have neuter plural words that also end in A, like bacteria. That's now one of them would be one bacterium, but when you say bacteria, you're talking about plural. And you don't usually confuse bacteria and a girl's name like Carla, though you usually know that one of them is plural, is a neuter thing, and the other is a feminine thing. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem to distinguish them. But the main thing, again, what you want to be sure to do is to distinguish Rome as the topic of the sentence versus Rome as a side thought. Okay? So going back to our endings then, we have I, in the masculines us, o, e, and in the neuters o, a. And then, so to review our objectives, hopefully you now know that you need to hold all of these for a double length. And you need to know what situation you use them. Well, the situation in which you use them is in the ablative, as a side thought. Of course, you will also use them in certain other situations too, but used as an ending, you're using them in a prepositional phrase as a side thought, or in the ablative. Any of those answers are fine. And let's see. Hopefully you can distinguish from ah. And so in the future, if you don't say in Roma, that's wrong. Say in Roma. And hopefully you can also distinguish all on the page, although they will look and sound identical, a feminine in pink from a neuter in gray. And then lastly, hopefully you've learned the other endings e, o, a, and us, and I. So all of these you need to learn by heart, and again, you will need them for completing the writable stories. Alright, that's all.